600 Spanish soldiers. That's the number you've probably heard. 600 guys sailed across an ocean and toppled two of the most powerful empires in the Western Hemisphere. The explanation you get is guns, steel, horses. End of story. This video is about what would have actually happened if the Aztec or Inca empires had gotten gunpowder before the Spanish arrived. Most people asking the question assume the answer is obvious. Give them cannons, they win. History flips. But the more you dig into what really happened, the more you realize the guns were never really the point. And by the end of this video, you're going to see the whole conquest story completely different. I want to start with the real numbers, then trace exactly how gunpowder changes them. And at the very end, I'll tell you the one factor that no weapon on earth could have fixed. Let's start with what actually happened. The real story is already wild enough. When Cortés's forces arrived at Otumba, one of the most decisive moments of the entire conquest, the Spanish numbered fewer than 500 survivors, many of them wounded, facing an Aztec host estimated in the tens of thousands. That's not a few hundred guys beating an empire. That's a few hundred guys barely surviving a battle, and even then, this picture is incomplete because through a combination of raw forces and political maneuvering, Cortés had secured the alliance of the Tlaxcaltepec, subjugated enemies of the Aztec Empire during his advance on Tenochtitlan. By the time of the final siege in 1521, his indigenous allies numbered in the tens of thousands, dwarfing the Spanish forces many times over. The Tlaxcalans provided shelter, medical care, and thousands of additional warriors driven by their deep enmity towards the Aztec overlords who had imposed burdensome tribute and warfare upon them for generations. So right away, the steel-beat stone story starts to fall apart. The Tlaxcalans didn't join Cortés because he had better weapons. They joined because they hated the Aztecs and saw an opportunity. Now, Pizarro's conquest of the Inca is even more extreme on paper. He invaded with about 168 soldiers, 62 horses in 1532, but he walked into an empire that had just finished tearing itself apart. The Inca had fought a brutal war between two half-brothers, Huáscar and Atahualpa, and that war had left the empire politically fractured and its armies exhausted before a single Spaniard fired a shot. The winning side had barely caught its breath, and here's the part most people don't know. The Civil War itself was triggered by a smallpox epidemic that swept down from Mesoamerica years before Pizarro even arrived, killing the reigning Sapa Inca and his designated heir around 1524 to 1528. The empire didn't just lose the ruler, it lost the chain of command. Pizarro didn't conquer a healthy empire, he walked into the wreckage of one. And that brings us to the weapons themselves, because the Aztecs and Inca were not primitive. The signature Aztec weapon was the macuaro, a wooden paddle sword with rows of obsidian blades set into the edges. Obsidian fractures into an edge sharper than surgical steel. The Spanish described it as capable of decapitating a horse in a single blow, and it was genuinely feared by the conquistadors. Aztec warriors also wore quilted cotton armor, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters thick, effective against arrows and blunt force that many Spanish soldiers actually adopted themselves because European steel plate caused dangerous overheating in the Mexican climate. Now, the Aztecs and Inca had smelting, casting, alloying, going back over 1,000 years. They worked gold, silver, copper, bronze, but that metalworking was directed almost entirely at ceremonial status objects, not weapons or tools. True iron and steel only arrived in the Americas with the Spanish. So, how would they even get gunpowder in the first place? Gunpowder was invented in China, most likely by Taoist alchemists sometime in the mid-9th century. It moved from alchemy to military use within a century. Fire arrows, bombs, early cannon. There's no good evidence anyone independently invented gunpowder outside of China, but every society that got it through transmission. The Mongol conquest spread westward. It reached the Middle East by roughly the mid-1200s, and Europe shortly after got it. The Americas were simply cut off from that transmission network. Imagine whatever the mechanism. A shipwreck, a trans-Pacific contact, some chain of trade that we don't have records of. That the formula and the know-how reached Tenochtitlan or Cusco by around 1450, that gives them roughly 70 years before Cortés and Pizarro arrived. Portuguese traders introduced matchlock firearms to Japan in 1543, and the weapon was rapidly reverse engineered by local blacksmiths, leading to mass production within a year. By 1549, Oda Nobunaga was already ordering 500 guns to be produced for his armies. A non-European society got gunpowder technology, scaled it fast, and used it to reshape the balance of power on their own terms. Japan could do that because they already had a mature iron and steel industry, centuries of swordsmithing, an entire culture of metalworking. The blacksmiths who reverse engineered the matchlock mechanism had the tools and the knowledge base to do it almost immediately. The Aztecs and Inca did not have that foundation. Bronze cannons were absolutely used in Europe and Asia for centuries, so it's not a hard but impossible, but manufacturing gunpowder weapons at a scale without an existing iron industry is a real, meaningful constraint. Japan proves the technology transfer is plausible. It also shows exactly what the Aztecs and Inca were missing to pull it off at the same speed. So let's say they figure it out. Let's say by 1450, Tenochtitlan has bronze cannons and some form of gunpowder-based weapons in production. Cortés lands in 1519. What actually changes? The first thing that changes is the gap closes fast. Horses caused genuine terror the first time Mesoamerican warriors encountered them. Cavalry was as much as a psychological weapon as a physical one. Cannons and muskets are loud, smoky, and lethal at a range in ways that would absolutely unsettle Spanish forces facing them for the first time from the other direction. There's a completely plausible scenario where a surprise cannon volley against Cortés's initial landing forces ends the whole expedition before it starts. But here's what doesn't change, and this is where it gets really interesting. Gunpowder in Aztec hands doesn't fix the alliance problem. The Tlaxcalans didn't side with Cortés because the Spanish had better weapons. They sided with them because they had spent generations at war with the Aztecs and they saw a way out. A stronger Aztec military might push every regional rival even harder toward whoever shows up on the coast. Historians still debate exactly how deadly that first wave of smallpox was in 1520, but nobody disputes that disease reshaped the outcome over the following century. The epidemic killed Cuitlahuac, the Aztec Emperor who took over after Moctezuma's death. In Peru, smallpox is believed to have killed the reigning Sapa Inca and his heirs years before Pizarro even arrived, triggering the civil war that fractured everything. Estimates suggest around 200,000 Inca deaths from smallpox in the 1520s alone, and over the following century, the value of Mexico's population collapsed by somewhere between 85 and 90%. A cannon doesn't stop that, a musket doesn't stop that. An empire that's military stronger but still loses a third of its population and its head of state to an invisible enemy is in a catastrophic position. The gunpowder changes the battlefield, it does nothing about biology. And that's actually the most important takeaway here. The popular story that steel and gunpowder beat Stone Age warriors can be seen in a different way. Cortés was vastly outnumbered even by the standards of 1519 and was only viable because of massive indigenous alliances born from political grievances and a disease catastrophe that no military technology of the era could have stopped. So there you have it. If you've made it this far, drop a comment, like, and subscribe if you like animated history videos like this.